Ladies and gentlemen who are joining us here in London today, welcome to the launch of DNV's Energy Transition Outlook 2024, and welcome to the many of you who are joining us from all corners of the world on the live stream. We're very excited to be launching the newest edition of DNV's Global Energy Transition Outlook from London. London is a special place for us. We launched our very first global outlook in 2017 at the Bloomberg studio. And since then, we've launched the reports from various locations, including from Paris last year, but we really enjoy returning to London. Earlier this year, we also launched a China special report, a UK country report, and a new report on the new power systems, which all can be downloaded from our website. London also feels like a good and timely location to discuss our latest energy transition research. It is impressive to read the headlines about the developments happening in the UK, including the closure of the last coal power station in the UK 2 weeks ago, and the announcement by the UK government about the pledge of 22 billion British pounds for capture carbon and store carbon emissions from energy industry and hydrogen production. So what's on the agenda today? We will, of course, start the program with sharing the highlights of the new report. We have then invited Lucy Siegel to lead the conversations with our guests from the industry and public affairs. Lucy is a UK-based journalist, broadcaster, and writer on ecological issues and sustainability, and she has written 5 books, so some of you might have come across her before. Our first panel discussion will focus on the next 5 years, the biggest impact on the transition, with executives from global investment firm KKR, CS developer Storegga, energy technology company Kaluza, and global energy company Equinor. And I'm also looking forward to our hydrogen panel with executives and experts from renewable energy company Ørsted, National Gas, and DNV. And we have invited the global energy lead from WWF to share some reflections. One practical comment, almost 15,000 of you are joining us on various online streaming platforms. Those of you who are joining us on LinkedIn have the opportunity to use the chat function and ask questions, and our experts will try to respond as quickly as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to DNV's Group President and CEO, Remi Eriksson, who will share the highlights of the new report with us.
Welcome to the launch of the 2024 edition of DNV's Energy Transition Outlook. This is a forecast of how the world energy system will change towards 2050. This year, finally, we celebrate a milestone for humanity: peak emissions from the production and use of energy. Of course, we don't know exactly when this will happen, but of course, our forecast does show that from next year onwards, emissions is likely to start declining. Sadly, that decline is too slow for net zero by 2050. And our forecast is that we are heading for 2.2 degrees Celsius of global warming by the end of this century. The world has in fact already been at 1.6 degrees, above the pre-industrial average for the past 12 months. Climate impacts are already visible and significant. So what does peak emissions mean, and where does it come from? Well, peak emissions means that clean energy has started to replace fossil fuels and fossil energy in absolute terms globally. And the technologies that has done most of the lifting for that are batteries and solar PV, which has been performing better the past couple of years than most forecasters have expected, including ourselves. In 2023, new solar installations globally surged by 80% to reach 400 gigawatts. One of the reasons solar is gaining ground so fast is because battery prices are plunging, making 24-hour solar plus storage power more accessible. Battery prices fell 14% last year, and they will keep on falling. That means EVs are poised to become cheaper too, which again means that the world is still on track towards our long-standing prediction that 50% of new passenger vehicle sales worldwide will be electric by 2031. If we look more closely at the dynamics geographically leading to emissions peaking, China is a major contributor. Record EV sales there means that petroleum demand in China is beginning to ebb away. Also, record solar installations are finally edging out coal in China's power sector. Furthermore, highly competitive clean technologies from China are advancing the transition globally, but they are facing tariff backlash in some regions, and fully protecting all homegrown clean tech supply chains may come at a too high a premium that risks slowing progress on decarbonization. So there is a very difficult balance to be found between national security, economic goals, and Paris Agreement ambitions. Not all renewables are enjoying runaway growth, though. We've seen growth slowing in offshore wind in the past 2 years due to a mix of reliability, supply chain, and the cost of financing challenges. And we are starting, however, to see green shots of recovery with governments, for example, here in the UK, making auctions more attractive for bidders, and new markets are opening. However, because of the totality of challenges I just mentioned, we have adjusted our 2050 forecast for offshore wind down 18% versus last year's forecast. However, the doldrums in offshore wind are not the main challenges. Where we see least progress is with hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. These technologies are critical for the decarbonization of the hard-to-electrify sectors. Many of the first commercial hydrogen energy projects that have been trying to get off the ground have stalled due to cost overruns, and in some cases have been abandoned due to market uptake uncertainty. We have revised our long-term forecast for hydrogen and its derivatives down by 20% last year. This means that hydrogen's share of final energy demand in 2050 drops from 5% to 4%. At current costs, which often exceeds $5 per kilogram, green hydrogen is up to 5 times more expensive per megawatt hour than natural gas in Europe. The chicken and egg problem is that to get to the more viable $2 per kilogram level that we project in our report for the 2040s, hydrogen needs to progress through a learning curve that only can come from mass installations. The same scaling costs challenge applies for carbon capture and storage as well, where our current forecast is that investment in carbon capture during the entire forecast period up to 2050 will be less than the amount invested in solar and wind in 2023 alone. So why are nations kicking the hard-to-electrify can down the road and not tackling it with the urgency that the Paris Agreement requires? One answer surely is the diversion of national budgets towards military spending and away from energy transition investments. Also, extreme weather events are draining budgets and yet not cementing climate action. There is also the ongoing high cost of borrowing, which, although it's easing slightly now, continues to squeeze public budgets and prolong cost of living crisis in many households around the world. But it's not simply a question of funding. Governments at all levels must do a much better job of tackling NIMBYism and permitting delays, because those challenges are making renewable projects less profitable in several regions. There is also rising biodiversity concerns, challenging renewable and grid developments. Aligning with the global biodiversity framework is, of course, very important. However, regulations do not yet reflect that climate change will surpass land use changes like deforestation as the #1 cause of biodiversity loss by 2050. One of the drivers of the transition is that energy security concerns and decarbonization mostly pull in the same direction. For example, many governments have been willing recently to look past the cost disadvantage of nuclear power in the interest of energy security. So we have adjusted our forecast upwards, reflecting a willingness to pay an additional 8 to 20% for nuclear energy. Furthermore, we see some authorities, particularly in Europe and China, with their high dependency on fuel imports, are taking the all-available source approach to energy security. This inevitably leads down the path to solar and wind energy because that is by far where the main action is short-term. So to summarize the main changes over the past year, #1, China is moving even faster. Second, solar and batteries are booming. Third, hydrogen and CCS at the more expensive end of the transition are struggling. And #4, we have a more conflict-ridden world, but on the positive side, one where energy security concerns mainly align with decarbonization. So the sum of all these changes is neutral in our forecast. In other words, the pace of the progress is similar to what we saw last year. The most likely outcome we see is a 50-50 split of fossil versus non-fossil fuels in the 2050 primary energy mix. And as you can understand, this is very far from net zero, and a forecast that is associated with a 2.2 degrees of warming by 2100. Some of you may have seen our previous net zero reports, where we outline how the world could close the gap between our most likely forecast that I presented here today and a future that sees the world achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We have decided not to issue a pathway to net zero report this year. We believe that achieving net zero by 2050 is, for all practical purposes, out of reach. However, that does not mean the target is irrelevant, because every effort must still be made to keep global warming as far below 2 degrees as possible. Finally, and important to note, a net zero energy system is perfectly achievable with the technologies we know today. And it would be a very efficient energy system and a very clean one. But we will not achieve that shift without placing a real price on externalities associated with the fossil fuels. Thank you.
We are at a historic moment. Renewable energy is scaling at such a speed that 2024 is likely to be the year of peak energy emissions. And whilst the long-term trend is clear, the short-term is more volatile. This is a momentous year for democracy, with 8 of the world's 10 most populous countries going to the polls. But what does this mean for the energy transition in the short term? Policy priorities have changed. The energy trilemma is pulling towards security and affordability, and the fight for net zero has featured less prominently in many campaigns. Governments, households, and the energy industry have been buffeted by high inflation and interest rates. Considering these short-term challenges, what are the technological, policy, and financial drivers for the energy transition over the next 5 years?
Thank you very much, Remy, for that amazing opening speech and to Ulrika for the generous introduction. We come now to our first panel, the next 5 years, the biggest impact on the transition. Let me first of all introduce you to our incredible panelists, because we think we've pretty much got all of the parts of the jigsaw for the energy transition right here, so I'm not going to waste this opportunity. Okay, so sitting next to me is Emmanuel Lagarrigue. Welcome to you. Emmanuel is partner and global co-head of climate at KKR. What an intriguing job title, and really just serves to show how finance is the critical catalyst for the energy transition. Emmanuel brings considerable experience to bear leading the firm's climate strategy within the infrastructure business. Thank you for joining us. Next to Emmanuel, we have Felicity Fliss Jones, who is Flex Solutions Lead at Kaluza, another great future-forward job title. Fliss is pioneering new technology, including vehicle-to-grid, and Kaluza is at the forefront of the energy revolution, connecting households and utilities. I just want to say Fliss is also a proud alumni of DNV. You're very welcome here today. Thank you very much. Then we have Nick Cooper, who is chairman of Storegga, executive chair, of Storegga. And Storegga, as I'm sure many of you know, is the pioneering developer of carbon capture, removal and storage solutions with offices in London, Houston and Scotland. Storegga is involved in a number of large projects in the US. And Nick began his career, little backstory for you, as a geophysicist. There you go. Maybe you'll draw on some of that again this morning. And last, but by no means least, we have David Cairns, who is Vice President, Political and Public Affairs at Equinor. Welcome to you. Now, David has had a fascinating and illustrious career. He was previously the British Ambassador to Sweden and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's Director for the Nordic-Baltic Network. And for the Foreign Office, he's also served in Japan, Geneva, for the UK's WTO delegation. And he now lives in Cambridge in the UK with his wife, children, and pets. I would love to talk to you about your pets, but we do not have time. Okay, so we must crack on because we've got a lot to talk about. Now, as I said, we've pretty much got a representative of every part of the jigsaw here. So let's dive straight in, David, with a snapshot of the geopolitical situation. How would you characterize the current situation in respect to the energy transition? Where are the hotspots, and how is this going to change over the next 5 years?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Good morning, everybody. I'd love to talk pets as well. But firstly, thanks very much to DNV, great friends of Equinor, for being here. It's a pleasure. Obviously, the question is huge, and the possible answers are huge. I think I'll just make 2 points. Number one is the unexpected. So in the last year, we would not have expected there to be a war in the Middle East. 3 years ago, we would not have expected Russia to invade Ukraine. 5 years ago, we would not have expected COVID. So if we look ahead for 5 years, there is going to be stuff that happens that we are not anticipating now, and we will all have to adjust and react to that. However, I think in the most immediate term, the most important issue coming up is around the American presidential election and what the new American president does around Russia and Ukraine. Because if you remember, it was the Russians' invasion of Ukraine that has caused huge inflated energy prices, then inflation prices, and a lot of the trouble we see at the moment. So not only is it important for that, it is also important geopolitically, because if the next US president essentially does lose Ukraine to Russia, what does China make of that for the South China Sea and Taiwan? What do Global South or other emerging nations take for that for the global order, and how does that develop? So I think that's the number one issue.
Okay, very good. That was a very comprehensive answer in a short space of time, but just a little add-on, just give us a preview. We've heard China mentioned a lot this morning. Enabler or something that we need to be wary of when it comes to the energy transition?
Both.
Right.
Both.
Okay. We'll unwrap that more as we go on. Thank you very much. Fliss, I want to come to you, and I want to dive straight into technology. So we're taking this 5-year view. Is there a sense that we heard from Remy, we have the technology we need to make this happen? That's not the factor that's at fault here. Do we have all the technology, or is there more to come?
Well, I absolutely agree. The technology is here, and it's software that's the new frontier here. So we've got a situation where energy suppliers and energy companies more generally are hampered by using technology that's designed for the old world where energy's flowed in one direction. We know it's now flowing in multiple directions. We know that the challenge is how do we manage, store and share our energy. But and we've got a situation where we've got millions of smart meters out there, millions of EVs and flexible devices, but a lot of that decarbonisation potential is going untapped because companies haven't got the right tools to understand their data and to know how to use that data to innovate more efficiently. So I think software absolutely is at the frontier here.
Okay, brilliant. That gives us something that we can come back to as well. I love your energy, by the way, Fliss. I think if we had a lot of that energy, then the energy transition would be streets ahead. Okay, Emmanuel, let's come to you because this can seem like a sort of dance between regulator, developer, financier, and many would say that it seems like the easy gains, the low-hanging fruit, as we call it, are being funded, and the hard stuff is not getting the investment traction. What do you think needs to change over the next 5 years?
No, it probably takes 12 or 15 technologies to decarbonize the entire physical economy. And today, 2 of them have reached maturity and are funded even by very steady infrastructure funds. That's solar and batteries. We just see this in the DNV report. Electric mobility is next, probably, and then decarbonization of heavy industry using a little bit of hydrogen, as long as we don't consider hydrogen as an energy carrier, but more as a catalyst to decarbonize some industries. Then carbon capture and storage, and so on and so forth. So think of it as a conveyor belt where over the next 10 to 15 years, all those technologies will come to maturity and will be more and more investable by first venture capitalists and then people at a later stage and then early stage investor in infrastructure and eventually get to that maturity. So it's a work in progress and what's happening in solar today and solar and batteries may well happen in hydrogen or in CCS in 10 to 15 years from now. We just have to be a bit patient. Those things are big. It's about regulation. It's about policies. It's about geopolitics. It's about building supply chains to shift from a fossil fuel-based economy to a metals-based economy. So we're talking about a lot of capital and a lot of things that need to change. So it's going to take a bit of time, but it's happening.
How do you balance the need to be patient with the need for urgency and the climate crisis?
Well, we see it, right? 2.2 degrees. This is not exactly where we want it to be. So there is a reason to be optimistic. At least emissions have peaked and they're going down. But we are not going to reach net zero, according to the DNV report. We should go faster and be bolder as a society. Yes, but again, it takes a village. And changing the entire energy system and the demand that goes with it is a very tall order.
But I think there's real good case studies of this happening incredibly quickly. Change can happen quickly. So in my own work, 12 months ago, I was working with energy suppliers and utilities to design domestic flexibility pilots. We'd be talking, with the technical innovation teams of pilots involving maybe a few hundred homes. But wow, has stuff changed? So now we're no longer talking about pilots. We're talking about scale-ups. Just in the UK, there's a Kaluza-powered EV tariff for smart charging called Charge Anytime, and it's now got tens of thousands of customers on it. So things can move very quickly, actually, and I think electric mobility and what's happening in the home is absolutely at that point.
Okay, hold that thought because we'll come back in a minute to why that happens. David, did you want to say something? No? Okay, we're going to go to Nick. We haven't heard from you yet, Nick. So you're developing these huge energy transition projects, namely CCS and hydrogen. What's your experience of getting the right backing and opportunity for them to take off?
Hello, everybody. So as Remy and Emmanuel said, hydrogen and CCS are sectors which are lagging. And our experience, there's three things you really need to see to get these moving. And having said it's a struggling sector, I'm naturally an optimist, so let's think about solutions. Point one is you need patient capital, private sector capital. And I would say that for reasons I'll come to in a second, that there's a lot of capital out there to deploy into hydrogen, and particularly into CCS. But it has had some frustrations, and it's getting exacerbated by some policy changes in some of the leading countries. So that's one thing to watch. And watch sovereign wealth take a more active view. It can take this 10 to 15-year horizon view when private equity often is more 5 to 7 years. So just watch that trend. Point two is a carbon price or a proxy for it or a carbon incentive. You need $80 to $150 a tonne for these hard-to-abate industries to really start to move as a herd and start to be incentivized to decarbonize. We'll come back to that. The third thing, though, is consistent policy making so that investors and companies like ours can believe that the business model is there and there to stay. And unfortunately, a lot of the leading countries, and I won't name them, but on net zero have been flipping between second and fifth gear and back to second again. And that is really damaging for consistency and assurance for putting the money to work. We need to build this huge reverse hydrocarbon cycle that is CCS really quickly. We all understand that, but you need consistent policy and policy rollout. Ironically, we're seeing better conditions at the moment in countries that started later, but which are more centrally planned economies, because they have got their nationally defined contributions and they are taking the 15-year view, and they may have started from a later, lower point, but they are more consistent and more reliable as partners.
I think the thing that's important here, so of course policymakers are extremely, they have a big role here, but every country, every region is going to play it differently. The starting point is different. The societies are different. The values, the political situation in every country are different. So sometimes people try to compare the Green Deal in Europe with the IRA. Let's not go there. This is the starting point of Europe and the US are so different when it comes to energy mix, innovation incentives, and so on and so forth. So in some cases, ETS and CBAM, also putting a price on carbon, is going to be extremely efficient to unlock a number of sectors. In other cases, it's going to be just inflationary and probably even stall the transition. So policy makers will play a different role in different countries, and we should not be frustrated because it's different from one place to the other. They just are respectful of where their country is starting from.
Okay, while we're talking to you, we're talking about funding as well. What about private capital? How much will come from private capital, and how do you see your sector changing?
Well, for us, we are extremely bullish with the role we can play in this transition. First, because, as we said at the beginning, just the first few low-hanging fruits have matured. There's many more coming, so lots of opportunity. Second, public equities are not equipped to finance the transition. We've seen that with many large oil and gas companies building very big plans to transition their companies to greener futures until their shareholders just violently push back on those plans and basically stop them. Private capital, as Nick was saying, is patient capital by definition. 5, 7, 10 years horizon. This is the place to start, right? So we don't need to deliver on a quarterly basis a balance sheet and a P&L. We really care about the long-term construction of sustainable businesses. This is why private capital, we think, is going to be both in equity and in credit to play a more and more important role.
Thank you very much for that. David, let's come to you. So over the next 5 years, are we likely to see a point when politicians are willing to talk about net zero, carbon pricing and these sort of elements? Because they don't seem to be a selling point at the moment. They're kind of crowded out. Would you expect that to change?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that my colleague in Tanzania always tells off me and her other Northern European colleagues to remind us that in her country where we have business, less than half the population have any electricity at all. And I think sometimes we forget that for a lot of the world there are different and more important pressing issues, and we need to work with that. And then secondly, coming back to the DOE predictions and so on, it does give you an emotional roller coaster. You think emissions have peaked, fantastic, but it's going to be 2.2%. Well, that sounds really bad. But actually, at the last major COP in Glasgow, the predictions after that were that it was going to peak at 2.6%. So on that, 2.2 feels a little bit better. And on the little bit better scale, the great Terry Leahy of Tesco always used to say every bit counts. And Greta Thunberg agrees. If we can't get to 1.5, at the moment it's 2.2, well, can we get to 2.1 or 2.0 or 1.9? So every bit does help. And in that, we've talked about technologies, how the transition view here is actually the effect is net zero. Some things are going faster, some things are going slower. Technology is going faster for this and others. And that's fantastic. And I think that we need to be practical and push what's going faster and get things up to speed that are going slow.
Well, thank you for threading in our favourite UK supermarket slogan. These things live a long time. Okay, Fliss, I promised that I would come back to you because I really want to unwrap the ingredients of how you embed this technology, how confident are you that we can embed the change that's needed? What have you noticed that works?
So we need to talk about people. We need to talk about
We
people.
do.
In a kind of energy supplier context, that would be kind of energy consumers. Taking smart charging of EVs as an example, you can have the most sophisticated optimization engine, but if customers and EV drivers, when they come at home, if they're not plugging in their car and leaving that plugged in for a duration of time, you can't do that optimization. You also need to make sure that with smart charging that customers trust what you're doing with optimization, that they're not just hitting override. And so it kind of points to the fact that it's not just about technology, it's about how technology works well with people, with consumers. And I think the key to that is partly about smart proposition design and having the right customer incentives. And it's also about having really awesome CX so that and user experience so that it's really designed well. But it's not just about technology, people matter too.
Yes, that's a really, really important point. Now, this panel is so short and it's flown by, so I'm going to be that really awful moderator, and I'm going to ask you to round up by picking one thing, just one, and it can be something you've already mentioned if you feel very strongly about it, that we need to watch out for in the next 5 years that is going to be a really, really decisive player. And Nick, I'm looking at you because I'm going to start with you, which is very unfair, but that's the way life is sometimes.
Thanks very much. Okay, one thing. On the negative side, I haven't seen anything in the last few COPs, sadly, and with a complicated geopolitical position at the moment that is going to see many countries voluntarily progressing a global carbon price, which is a real shame, or an equivalent. But on the optimistic side, ironically, I think we could see something in the next 5 years through the back door. I think the EU CBAM is likely to provoke a reaction in North America, regardless of the administration next year in America. We are seeing China establishing its own one. There's talk now about ASEAN having a CBAM. That starts to feel over a 5-year horizon much more like regional carbon pricing than we're currently expecting. So I think through the back door, we could see at different levels, and the arbitrage will go over time, carbon pricing coming, ironically, through protectionism rather than through net zero drivers quicker than we might expect. But let's see.
That's wild. Thank you for bringing in carbon pricing, which I never thought I would say. Thank you. Emmanuel, I'm coming to you now.
Electrification first, and that's one of the conclusions of the report. Let's electrify everything we can in industry, in transportation, in buildings, using smart solutions and software when it helps improving efficiency. And then we'll tackle the rest that cannot really be electrified before 2050, but electrification first.
Thank you. Fliss?
The relationship between customers and their energy suppliers or retailers or utilities is going to be transformed.
Love it. David?
And then lastly, I think to Nick's point about COP, I think it's important to keep the COP show on the road. Next year, Brazil is really important. So to making sure that Baku does what it needs to do, prepare for that, super crucial.
I wish we had more time. Such amazing threads that we can discover more about here. I'd like to have a round of applause for our panelists, for Emmanuel, for Fliss, for Nick, and for David. I really enjoyed that. Fast and furious, very punchy. I hope you enjoyed that to our online audience as well. Okay, so coming up next, we have our next panel. And to introduce that, we're going to play a short film, Where is All the Hydrogen?
Between now and 2050, DNV forecasts some $3.5 trillion in capital expenditure will be spent on hydrogen production, and billions more on pipelines and the construction of ammonia terminals. But if we want to decarbonize quicker, this is nowhere near enough. The Energy Transition Outlook forecasts hydrogen will not even meet 1% of global energy demand in 2030, and only 4% by the middle of the century. This is a long way short of DNV's previous net zero scenario. And whilst DNV's carbon capture and storage forecast is more optimistic, CCS will only capture 6% of remaining emissions in 2050. Without these technologies, the hard-to-abate sectors, like shipping and aviation, have no easy route to decarbonize as hydrogen derivatives are needed. After attracting a lot of attention, the question is, where is all the hydrogen?
Well, there we are. What a question. But to answer it, I have an illustrious panel. Let me introduce you to our panel. Duncan Clark, who's sitting next to me, heads up Ørsted in the UK and Ireland, and the company's largest regional portfolio of offshore wind farms in operation and development, as well as onshore renewables, energy storage, and developing power-to-X solutions. And before Ørsted, Duncan spent 18 years in the UK energy industry, primarily renewables and energy storage. You're very welcome here today. Thank you for joining us. And then we have next to Duncan, Sarah Kempton. Hello to you, Vice President for Energy Transition and Innovation Development at DNV, a hydrogen lead basically for DNV's UK business. Thank you so much for being with us as well. And then at the end, we have Jake Tudge, who is the Corporate Affairs Director at National Gas. Now, National Gas, as I'm sure many of you know, own and operate the almost 5,000-mile gas national transmission system transporting gas across Great Britain to power stations, major industries, storage facilities, interconnectors, businesses and homes. And I think before that, you're a management consultant working with the energy industry as well. So vast knowledge from our panellists here. Now, we had that very good film setting the discussion. But Sarah, I'm just going to come to you first, because given the low base and the small percentages projected for hydrogen, there will be some who are asking, why are we even platforming hydrogen today? Give us the DNV perspective on that, if you would.
Well, it's a bit of a wake-up call, really, isn't it? And hydrogen needs to be reserved for all the difficult jobs. So it's going to be jobs like all those hard to decarbonise sectors. It's going to be very, very important for energy security and all those kind of things. So it is a wake-up call. We can't reach net zero without hydrogen. We're not going to get to the 2050 targets without hydrogen. We absolutely need it. But the problem is it's being kept for all those really difficult things to do, and all the low-hanging fruit's been plucked, as it were.
Okay, well, we will get into that. Thank you very much for that summary. Duncan, let's come to you. So Ørsted has its own experience of the scrapping of a major project. We might as well just say it as it is. Can hydrogen recover from these sorts of setbacks, and why are they happening?
It can, and I think the stage we're at is exploring an extraordinary number of opportunities, very different opportunities, substituting for hydrogen in refineries and chemical processes, ammonia, a vector for long-term storage, and actually a very long list of quite different opportunities are being explored. And what's being explored here is both the technical solutions and also the commercial and regulatory frameworks that will allow them to happen, allow the investment to come in. It's very important that we get started with as many real projects as possible. We've got to get on that maturity curve that was talked about earlier. We've got to start learning by doing, and that needs those investments. Right now, we're seeing some gaps in terms of the way those frameworks come together, the way they allocate risk, the way they make sure all the different ingredients are ready at the right time to be investable. And in particular, we're seeing a lag in, if you like, willingness to pay for what it's turning out to cost to show these things and get on that physical learning curve. So That's partly about structuring in a way so that those externalities that were talked about are converted into willingness to pay.
What's the major learning from what happened?
I think there is a risk of trying to go too fast without all of these ingredients in place. You won't be able to secure decent investment if unrealistic risks of, demand, or maybe some of the supporting infrastructure for transport and storage, if those things are not there, then let's not expect the money to flow quickly. And of course, that's what we need. We need to move from exploratory projects to really major deployment of capital by 2050.
Okay, thank you very much, and for being so frank as well. It's very all our panelists are. Jake, let's talk about what is there. Let's talk about the infrastructure and where the opportunity is.
Yeah, so National Gas own and operate, as you said, the national transmission system. So we move gas at high pressure primarily to power stations and major industry across Great Britain, but we also interconnect with continental Europe and we supply gas to the island of Ireland. So we have a very GB, so British central role, but see what's happening internationally with gas markets, being part of what is a global gas market and a global gas network of transmission pipelines. And what we're seeing that internationally a lot of countries are looking to solve the problem that was described earlier of chicken and egg with a solution known as blending. So blending is, we think, going to be a key enabler in scaling the hydrogen market, because as Duncan's described, we need to think about how we scale a market effectively and providing producers with the knowledge that there's going to be a market. And we would start by blending a small amount of hydrogen into transmission networks, providing confidence to producers that there will be a market when the primary demand is not available, so it's seen as an offtake of last resort, but most importantly, ensuring that we grow the market in a way that is most cost effective. So that's what we're looking at. There's about 10 countries internationally already blending, and we've got another 20 on the way, and many of them are neighbouring to Great Britain.
Okay, this might just be for me, but could you just explain blending a little bit more? What is the impact? What is the opportunity? Is it a CO2 thing? Is that not quite the right reading of it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. So why blend? And my team will attest to this. I get forever annoyed when I see blending talked about as a CO2 saving.
Oh, I'm glad I asked
that. That is a fantastic benefit of hydrogen, but it is not the primary benefit of blending hydrogen. If you are any producer of low carbon hydrogen, whether it's blue, green, or any colour of this hydrogen rainbow, if you know that there is going to be a demand point, i.e. a large pipe, that can take your hydrogen when the demand from your current user of hydrogen, industry, power, whatever it may be, can accept that hydrogen, you're able to lower your financing costs, you're able to bring down the economics in a good way of your production facilities, and ultimately we know that some of the green hydrogen producers that we're speaking very closely with, they can save upwards of 40, almost 50% off current strike prices if they were able to bake blending into their economic model.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Sarah, I want to come back to the cost. So Remy talked about this as well. So the problem is that hydrogen is simply too expensive and consumers are not prepared to pay the price. How does that change, and who is the consumer for hydrogen?
Well, given that hydrogen is going to be the thing that tackles all the hard to abate sectors and solves a lot of the energy system problems, and we can't reach net zero without it, then I'm not quite sure where the too expensive comes from. We cannot afford for the Earth to heat up by 2.2 degrees C. So we do need to use some of these more difficult solutions. And hydrogen is often compared with natural gas as a sort of a molecular energy vector. The thing about natural gas is it's produced, we can just take it out of the ground, we don't have to do anything. But with hydrogen, we actually have to make it. And if we're going to make it from water and from electricity, then it's obviously always going to have that little extra margin of cost there. But if we're using electricity that's surplus, or renewable electricity that's surplus to make the hydrogen, then we're actually sort of reducing constraint payments. We're actually creating hydrogen that we can store for when the wind's not blowing. So it's a very, very subtle and complicated thing. I don't think you can just look at it as the cost of it per tonne and compare it with other things. You need to think of it in the round, in terms of saving the planet, in terms of reducing, keeping the temperature rises down, and producing energy security. And the other thing is the energy system, although the Energy Transition Outlook talks about averages across the globe, the energy system does not work on averages. You always have to design the energy system to the peak demand. So the peak is when, for example, in Europe, when it's very, very cold, when the wind's not blowing, there will be a peak demand where we're going to have to pull energy from somewhere. We can't get it from renewables, so we're going to be pulling it, I think, from geological storage of hydrogen.
Okay, thank you. That was an amazing summary. Duncan, let's come to you. Can you see any ways of making it more cost effective or sharing the risk? Like, how is this going to evolve?
I think the secret is in the frameworks, as we call them. That's a combination of market mechanisms, regulation, blended in with the technical and commercial solutions. And it's about risk allocations in that. Quite often we're talking about very long life assets, way beyond the forecastability of markets. And as we've just said, we need to have the attitude that this is going to need to happen. It's a solution that needs to be made. So that clarity and often simplicity, because if you're doing something at what starts out as a low maturity solution, then it's probably not the right solution if you're going to need public and private involvement and capital to make it too complex. So I would go for rather simple frameworks to give, for example, line of sight to the revenues and security of offtake volumes, for example.
Jake, you're nodding. Is there anything that you want to kind of add? And how do you almost rehabilitate the reputation of hydrogen at this point, which is kind of your job, is it not?
No pressure. No, absolutely. So I think reputation's built through doing, and we're so proud of what we're doing with DNV and our friends at DNV at RAF Spade Adams. So DNV have a fantastic DNV research and test facility. I'm doing your job here, Sarah. But what we have built up at Spade Adam with DNV is a future grid facility. So we've taken bits of our pipe across the network that we didn't need anymore. They were going to be decommissioned. We've transported them up to the north of the country in Cumbria. We've run blends of hydrogen, and we've now run 100% hydrogen successfully through the assets. No issues, all the control systems worked, the assets performed as we expected, and that is how we build reputation. We build it by doing. No fuss, and it's a fantastic result and proves our pipes are up to the job.
Okay, let's have your pipes are up to the job. I think that's a great slogan, isn't it? I can't let that go unamplified. If we remember one thing from this session, Jake can always be relied upon. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into regulation. And Sarah, what regulation is needed in order to get things moving? And are we seeing parts of the frameworks evolve, and where?
Oh, that's a really big question.
I know.
There are regulations. I think for me, international collaboration, regulations that allow international collaboration are going to be very, very important. I mean, as Jake was saying, our gas system, our electricity system is connected to Europe and to Ireland. So international collaboration on regulations and standards. And I think that we also need to think very carefully about permitting and planning because, as Remy said, NIMBYism, people not wanting the new pylons or the new pipes or all the stuff near to where they live, but they want the energy transition to happen. So I think permitting and planning, standards for trading, standards for insurers, standards for financiers to have the competence to invest in this stuff. And I think finally, certainly in the UK with hydrogen is very important that we are able to share genuine and correct information with the public so that they can understand what's going on and make informed choices. I'm not sure that's quite regulation, but I think it's something that does need to happen.
It's a really good point. I mean, where would you say, and also a big question, where would you say the public is at now in their understanding of hydrogen?
Hydrogen, probably not very advanced in their thinking about it, because there's quite a lot of people making a lot of noise about hydrogen, sort of saying that it's dangerous, it's explosive and all these things. But a fuel by definition is dangerous and explosive. I mean, petrol is explosive, natural gas is. Hydrogen is just another energy vector, and we need to get that message across. We know how to handle methane, we know how to handle petrol and diesel, all those things, and we are rapidly learning how to handle hydrogen. So we just need to give the public the confidence that the engineers and the scientists know what we're doing, and that we're going to make it safe and it's going to be effective for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Duncan, let's come to you and ask you also about regulation and frameworks. What else do you think is needed, and what else do you think we could possibly see emerging?
So I mentioned simplicity already, and I think this doesn't exist in a vacuum. The rest of electrification also relies on frameworks. Those frameworks are there to create an attractive environment for deploying an enormous amount of capital, mostly private capital. So, I think we'll see exactly the same exploration and corrections in the regulatory frameworks as we will with the technical solutions. There will be deployments which are very successful. There will be others which turn out to be dead ends, and the same will happen with the regulation. There's some really interesting experiments. In the UK, we've got the hydrogen allocation rounds. We've got a CFD-based support mechanism that's in a good way starting small. It needs to build. My personal guess is that we'll need to move to slightly simpler support frameworks for these early stage projects.
What will they sort of look like? What will they deal with?
So at the moment, we've got a CFD-supported hydrogen allocation rounds. That's probably not a perfect match in terms of the reference commodities, the reference pricing and indexation for an electricity-driven green hydrogen production, for example. So, it's about risk. It's about looking at the risks that somebody bringing forward something at low maturity is going to have to manage. And what you don't want to do with the regulation is add to that pile of difficult to manage risk. Mm-hmm. You want something simple, mm-hmm. clear, easy to understand for everybody from, equity, debt, insurers, all of that. Mm-hmm.
Jake, I feel like I'm going to come back to the first question.
Oh, yeah.
Where is all the hydrogen?
So hydrogen is a relatively small market at the moment globally. But we're on the cusp of something amazing. So we have an opportunity to build a brand new market that will grow and decarbonise power and industry. I think we need to be even more ambitious, particularly in the UK. So, Duncan and the team and others in the renewable sector have done absolutely amazing things with the power sector, decarbonising it with offshore wind and the CFDs he spoke of. We now need the same ambition in hydrogen to decarbonise industry in those hard-to-electrify sectors and the power sector as well, and contribute to the growth of renewables. But when we look internationally, we see countries like Germany backing things such as a core hydrogen network, sometimes called a backbone. So that's the enabling infrastructure that everyone can hang off, whether you're the power station, the industrial user, the supplier of hydrogen. We've got many people in the UK recommending that we go ahead with that. We just need that signal. And that signal that there'll be a network and the pipes will be there to transport the hydrogen alongside resilient methane for many decades to come, will then give the confidence to those investors who we've heard are willing to deploy that capital. They just need the frameworks, the signals, and the confidence there'll be a market.
Thank you very much. And there we must end it, because we've come to the end of our time. Thank you for that very spirited and extremely interesting discussion. A round of applause for our panellists, for Duncan, for Sarah, and for Jake. Thank you so much. Wait 1 second. I hope you enjoyed that. These panels whiz past, don't they? We've got one more left, and it's on is there room for net zero aims? We're going to take a nature perspective. And here is a short video introducing that discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
A lot has changed since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. Although renewable energy build-out is surging, we will fall a long way short of net zero targets. DNV forecasts the planet will warm by 2.2 degrees by the end of the century. Climate change is not only a problem for humanity, but it is likely to become the leading cause of biodiversity loss. Yet building wind, solar farms, or new hydrogen facilities are not universally popular. NIMBYism, biodiversity, and environmental concerns are growing barriers to renewable energy in many regions. And with households squeezed after years of higher inflation and energy security becoming more important, is there room for net zero aims in the energy transition?
So there we are. And to answer some of those questions, I'm delighted to be joined by Dean Cooper, who is the Global Energy Lead at WWF. Just let me tell you a little bit about Dean. Before WWF, Dean had a big energy career spanning 30 years. His credits include the UK Energy Agency, European Commission, the Department of Minerals and Energy in South Africa. He worked in Botswana and South Africa, Energy Finance Minister with UNEP in Paris, Global Energy Sector Coordinator with SNV in the Netherlands. I could go on, but we've run out of time and I want to talk to you about the issues. So Dean, welcome. Thank you for giving us your time. And I really want to know, given your extensive career in the background and now with your role at WWF, and I know you're really, really passionate about what you do, what would the NGO Dean now representing nature say to the previous Dean, the Energy Dean? What would he say?
No, it's an interesting one. I mean, first of all, I should just say thanks to DNV for this opportunity and actually looking through the outlook to recognise the fact that we have to consider biodiversity, because many other organisations don't see that. We go into the question. I mean, I think the one-word answer is we've got to try to do this together. You know, we can't sort of continue to live in our boxes. So I went to many events such as this internationally around the world during the, as you say, the 30 years plus, and yeah, we'd talk about sort of energy issues. I mean, occasionally I'd sort of meet somebody from WWF, very occasionally, and we'd have a chat about sort of nature and wildlife things. And if I'm honest, I really wouldn't give it much more consideration. You know, I go back and I go into my energy box. And I think that is the problem, that we all sort of come to these events, we sort of have the conversations, but we're then back into our own silos. So I now know, from the 3.5 years I've been with WWF, that 55% of the global GDP depends on nature. That's $58 trillion. I also know that we've lost 70% of nature in the last 50 years, which is a bit scary. So if the world was a business, we'd be looking at closing down pretty soon, unless we had a fairly serious recovery plan. So that's the sort of challenge that we're faced with. Now, that's not to say that renewable energy isn't important. I mean, we still believe that renewable energy is the way to go. In fact, we want to get to 100% renewable energy. We've got a climate crisis. We've got to be careful. We've got to get to these targets. Issues here with DNV, obviously the 2.2 degrees is a concern, not doing a net zero by 2050. For us, 2050 is far too late. We've actually got to really move this along. So that's an issue we need to raise. But the fact is that we have to look at the climate crisis not being converted into a nature crisis. And interesting what some of the panelists were saying early on today. You know, we can be, I think it was, I was down here, Emmanuel from KKR talking about we've got to be bolder, we've got to go faster. And it's true. Felicity saying it can be done. We need some positive messages out there to make these links between the two sides. But I just say that the issue really is the bigger picture. And this is what I would say to my old self, is look, get out of the box. Start thinking about what is happening in other areas. We can't afford this silo mentality. If we want to get to these targets, and we need to get to these targets, we've got to start understanding the bigger picture.
Yes, and thank you. One of the many things I love about Dean is he always has a notebook and he's always making notes about what everyone else is saying, which is so great. So we've heard something, we've seen something of this central tension, what you might call trade-offs that come through in the report very strongly. How do we? WWF has a very specific emphasis that you just alluded to on cleaner, greener, fairer energy, 100% renewable energy. How does WWF stance address these trade-offs?
Well, I think that's a critical point, and I think we've all got to start accepting that the future isn't perfect. We're in a bit of a mess at the moment, and we've got to start thinking about what do we balance in order to get to a good conclusion. So trade-offs is the key issue. We talk about nature-safe energy, and if you want more details, Google it. Nature-safe energy, WWF, you'll see the background in there. It's an important one. But the sort of things that we're looking at are, for example, what if we want to expand renewable energy as quickly as possible? As you say, we're looking at 100% renewables, faster, greener, fairer. It's got to be quick. We want to cut some of the corners, but we don't want to jeopardize the conservation areas, the protected areas as a result of that. So when we're looking at siting and permitting for renewable energy, how do we deal with that process? Mm-hmm. Critical minerals is another one that people may have heard about. Yes, we are going to need to mine for lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. And in the localities, which is an important point I think one of the other panelists mentioned earlier, David Equinor talking about the situation in Tanzania is very different from what we know. We've got to understand the localities. So if we're mining for critical minerals in that particular area, we've got to be careful, we've got to manage it, but it's certainly a lot better than having to mine for the fossil fuels. Grid infrastructure, yes. Another trade-off. Yeah, we've got to think about what is the issue, what is the damage that's likely to be done by more pylons, more power lines. Understanding that, what are the alternatives? Can we decentralize grids in order to serve local communities rather than having the general rollout? So lots of issues which you've got to think about together.
Okay, we're out of time already. So I just want to recap that phrase. Was it nature-saving energy that you talked about?
Nature-safe energy.
Nature-safe energy,
one other thing to look for is we at COP26, we launched a platform to try to help bring people together. It's called the Coalition Linking Energy and Nature for Action, or Clean Action. So again, please have a look at that. The idea is to bring together people like yourselves, but not blaming everybody else about, that we need the policy, we need the finance, we need the technology, we need to have local buy-in, but rather to start doing something about it, having that foundation in order to share value, increase the value of your activity, because you can integrate it in with others acting in the same area, so we can align our interests. So it's a question of trying to take this forward together, big picture.
Okay, thank you so much for the big picture. There's your call to action. If you can go and look up Clean Action, and we're speaking as well to our vast online audience as well. Dean, thank you so much for joining us. Round of applause, please, for Dean Cooper. Thank you. And I'm now going to hand back to Ulrika Haugen for the last part.
Thanks. Thank you, Lucy, for great moderation, very good time management as well, and thank you to all panelists for sharing their perspectives and great discussions to listen. I've actually invited, to wrap up the session and our launch today, I've invited the Director of our Energy Transition Outlook, Sverre Alvik, to join me here on stage. Please, Sverre, to share your thoughts about the discussions and insights. And of course, first of all, congratulations on a great report. But
thank you.
What are your thoughts, having listened to those perspectives?
We heard here today our CEO Remy Eriksson start with talking about peak emissions. This is a milestone for humanity. Peak is not enough, as CO2 is cumulative in the atmosphere. Global temperature is not decreasing, although we reach a peak. We need to further reduce. And then the pace of that reduction is extremely important to get these well below 2 degrees, as we heard. We heard today about technologies. We heard about the well-performing solar PV, the well-performing batteries. And then we heard about the struggles. We heard hydrogen. But as was said by Sarah here, hydrogen is doing all the difficult jobs. It's a little unfair to say that they are not performing while the others are not, because they're not actually in the same league. They're doing two very different things. And I think if we are to move this, we need to think about not only the low-hanging fruits, but also these high-hanging fruits, and what do we do in there? And we know that needs to be hydrogen, that needs to be carbon capture, that needs to be a number of other technologies as well. And if we look at the areas that can influence this, we talk about technology, economy, policy, and behaviors. And when DNV present a most likely future, as we do, it's unfortunately not the floor of efforts, as we heard about Christina Figueras in COP. It's a most likely one, meaning it could move both directions. We could see geopolicy not make it 2.2, but 2.3 or 4. We could see policies, we could see voter preferences move it in the wrong direction. But that's not what we can afford. We need to move it in the right direction. We need to see technology say, I can offer you one more centigrade, 0.1 degree. By the way, did we hear the word AI today? I think there is a potential here. We need to see economy say that we can offer you 0.1 degree. We need to see policy say we can offer you another one. And behavior, another one. And then suddenly, did I hear a 1.9? Did I hear 1.8? And then I hope we can come back here next year and say that no, we're not only at the right track but the wrong pace, but we're also at the right track with the right pace. So that's my takeaways.
Fantastic, yes, and something positive that was said, wow, things have changed in the last 12 months. We're not talking about pilots, but about scale-up. So there were positive notes in the discussions that we've had. Thank you so much, and thank you to our audience, both online and here. You will receive an email. You can also download an executive summary or the full report from our website, and wishing the audience online now a very nice day.